Tylor has been working with mushrooms for over 10 years, and he started Alpine Valley Mushrooms, a certified organic family-owned mushroom farm in Saguache. He's very passionate about local community and ecosystems. Tylor's talk will be about the importance of nourishing our mycobiomes, the fungal extension of our mycobiomes for both human and planetary health. So please welcome Tylor Berreth.
Yay. Thank you so much. Yes, perfect. Thank you. All right. Thank you guys so much for showing up and being here. I am going to pull out this chair because I might sit down, but I honestly have way too much energy to sit down, I think. So I'm going to try to contain my excitement about mushrooms and try to keep this to a point that's concise and that people can kind of understand the points that I'm getting across. I tend to go on a lot of tangents about fungi, so I'll try to keep it narrowed down and try to hit the most exciting points. But as mentioned, so I'm up here to speak about our mycobiomes. And our mycobiomes extend much further than the mushrooms that we see growing out in nature. Our mycobiomes are actually integral in our health. So what do I mean by mycobiome? What a mycobiome is the fungal microbiome. So it's a fungal microbiome. No matter where you are, you can find them. You can find them on the planet, under rocks, under trees, in, basically all over the place. But one of the most important mycobiomes that I'm going to be talking about today is in the human gut. So when I refer to the term mycobiome, I'm mostly referring to the human mycobiome of the gut, which is our fungal community of our gut. So I'll give you a little background in my education and everything. I'm Tylor Berreth. I went to school for environmental reasons, kind of dropped out based on how depressed I was about looking at the environmental destruction that was happening. So then everything kind of ended up pushing me to fungi. So I went to MSU Denver after that. I found a passion for cultivating mushrooms at first, but then I found a passion for actually using mushrooms medicinally in my own life. So I grew up trying to chase a pro snowboard dream, and I constantly was hitting my head. So chronic traumatic encephalopathy is something that plagues a lot of like football players or people that have gotten a lot of concussions throughout their lives. I think that's kind of what originally turned me on to lion's mane specifically, so the lion's mane medicinal mushroom. It's extremely reparative to the brain and the nervous system, so I started to do my own bioremediating in my body based on the damage that I had done. So I was kind of just experimenting on myself, and based on what I felt, I just kind of felt a need to provide this information to other people because it seems like it's still fringe, and being like into mushrooms is a weird thing, but I want to make it a really cool thing, and we honestly need to be nurturing the mushrooms around us a lot more than we are for a lot of reasons. So, like I said, I went to school at MSU Denver, and I have to give a huge shout out to my mentors there because they were really the ones that pushed me into mycology. And I did not get my traditional mycology degree. I actually just found a passion for fungi in college, and all my professors were really excited about it too, and they didn't really know much. So that's really what propelled my education. Well, it was kind of like a self-driving motivation. And I think that's why it's so exciting for me to learn about them constantly, is because I'm constantly interested in the new science coming out, in the progress that we're making in terms of like genetic sequencing of fungi and what they mean in terms of like our health implications as well as environmental implications. So I think, so I got my degree in integrative healthcare because I was kind of trying to go pre-med, and I was just really fascinated by health and longevity specifically. I saw a few people within my family kind of suffer from chronic health illness, and then I started looking at statistics, and I realized how unhealthy we are actually as a country. So I don't really want to take this into a negative direction, but I do need to put some of these statistics out there so that people can understand how sick we really are as a nation. So it's estimated now that 60 to 80% of people actually in North America actually now are suffering from at least one chronic illness. That should be pretty impactful. That's literally over half of our population suffering from at least one chronic illness. 80% of us are metabolically deficient, roughly 80% of us. A lot of depression out there, a lot of suicidal tendencies, but I truly believe that we can not only reverse these issues, but make us more resilient to these issues in the future, actually literally just by incorporating fungi into our lives. So in order to think bigger, we got to think a lot smaller. So we got microcosms literally underneath us all over the place. And I'll have my notebook just so I kind of stay on track because I don't want to go on too many tangents. But we need to be thinking a lot smaller. We have these communities of organisms that are interacting in ways that we can't even fathom yet. We need more science behind this, but there's actually a lot of science that has come out about this already. So the term mycobiome was coined in 2010 by a scientist that actually started this company called Biome. I'm not here to promote that product at all. I just really am excited about the work that he's been doing. So he actually found out, him and his colleagues found out that we actually have multiple mycobiomes. We have a fungal mycobiome in our mouth. We have a fungal mycobiome in our skin. We have a fungal mycobiome in our genitourinary tracts, as well as our gut, and our lungs. So I really want to change the whole concept of the whole antifungal use for fungal infections specifically. I think we really need to be thinking about this in a different direction. So say, this is one of the main motivating factors of why I'm thinking this way. So I hear a lot of people that are suffering from candida overgrowth. It's like a major problem that plagues our society, but when they go to a naturopathic doctor, they're told to stay away from fungi. I would really encourage people to really think differently about that process. There are fungi that are extremely antifungal. If you think about how much they have to have an immune system in order to even get to their fruiting body stage, it's unfathomable, honestly, how much they have to fend off for themselves before they can actually fruit. So they're putting off all of these really antimicrobial constituents. So when we're consuming these fungi, we're actually helping our mycobiome, which is then protecting us from other pathogenic and opportunistic fungi. I also don't want us to see pathogenic and opportunistic fungi as bad entities. I want us to see this in a modulatory perspective. So we all have these fungi already present in our bodies. We all have candida. In fact, candida is actually one of the most necessary yeasts for our microbiome. It's super important to have candida. It's even more important to have candida in the right optimal levels. If you do not nurture your microbiome, yeasts, specifically candida albicans, will just override the entirety of the microbiome, especially as you get older. As you age, your bacteria and your yeasts start to far outnumber the helpful fungi and bacteria. So as you age, it's even more important to nurture that microbiome. What nurtures the microbiome? The microbiome is nurtured literally through eating fungi. So we have to stray away from this mycophobic tendency in the United States specifically, and we get approached all the time. Like, we have a mushroom booth over there, so we post up at all these markets, and there's people that come up all the time like, oh, I hate fungi. And I'm like, I don't take that personally. I don't care at all that you don't like fungi. I think you're doing a disservice to yourself. So I'm really I'm sorry for you that you're not interested in fungi, because do you like sourdough? And usually they're like, yeah, and I'm like, okay. Well, Saccharomyces cerevisiae is a fungi. So I just want us to start thinking about this a lot differently. I really want us to see these fungi as necessary things that we need to be incorporating into our diet. The statistics are kind of mind-blowing. So 99% of our cells in our body are actually microbial based.
All right, please welcome Tylor back to the stage.
Thank you. All right, thank you guys for hanging in there. I appreciate that. Okay, so I gotta hit this point home because it's really dramatic. 99% of our genetic code in our cells that make us up are literally non-human. So 99% of us is either bacterial, viruses, fungi, or different types of macrobiota, so different types of parasites and stuff like that. Absolutely mind-blowing, honestly. It's astounding how little of us is actually human. So 99% of us is mostly bacterial. That is known as the microbiome. The microbiome is made up of fungi too, though, if we're nurturing it. So 0.1% of those bacteria and of the microbiome is actually fungi. So if you think about it in that perspective, it's a very, very small amount of fungi in the system. But by surface area, they're equal to surface area in the bacteria. So they're much larger in their cell type, and they play crucial roles in our health and longevity, which is really ironic because if you think about it, 2 to 5% of our world's ecosystem is made up by fungi, yet we're entirely reliant on them for our survival. That's a very small percentage of something that we absolutely need and couldn't be here without. So we have to think about us evolving over a certain amount of time with this fungi. We are literally symbiotic with these fungi. If we're not nurturing that microbiome, however, that microbiome is going extinct. So I get approached all the time too of like, hey, this mushroom, this so-called edible mushroom was not edible for me. I got very sick. I really do think it's about how we're synthesizing this, and I do think it's about how much we have nurtured our microbiome versus not nurtured our microbiome. Everybody's talking about the microbiome, but the microbiome is really not getting as much light as I think it needs right now. And I think it's because it's only that 0.1% of the microbiome, so people can't really comprehend that it can be that powerful. But it really is. Science is really showing that, and I'll get into the science a little bit later. I really don't want to bore people with just the science, though, and I want to like get this point across of why I'm actually excited about this topic. Fungi, first of all, need to not be considered plants. A lot of people consider fungi plants, but they're entirely own kingdoms, so they need to be respected as such. They can't be equated. They can't be measured in the same way as plants. They're just entirely different, so we have to be thinking of them differently. They work in similar ways, and honestly, they work super uniquely with bacteria, and this is where the science is getting really exciting. So they're working in conjunction with bacteria and creating these microbiofilms that we don't even fully understand yet. So each fungi is interacting with each bacteria in its own way, creating these fungal bacteria biofilms. They think that these biofilms, the new science is showing that these biofilms actually may be one of the most crucial elements to our health and longevity overall. So yeah, they've been absolutely essential in the formation of this life, in the formation of this planet, in the formation of us as humans. It's no wonder why we're so closely connected. It's an unfathomably ancient entity, and all of these carry an astronomical amount of information in their fruiting bodies, in the mycelium, in the spores too. So I guess I should back up. What do I mean when I say fungi? I'm talking about mycelium, fruiting bodies, and spores. So all three of those life cycles of the fungi, that's what I'm kind of referring to. When I'm referring to fungi for diet, I'm referring specifically to the fruiting bodies, which is the mushrooms that are popping out of the mycelium. So right off the bat, I want to say that fungi are pretty much across the board immunomodulatory. And modulatory is a term that we really need to push into our popular lexicon right now. We're really anti or pro as a society, and we don't really see that modulatory as much in terms of like the macro perspective of our society. So modulatory is pretty ubiquitous throughout all fungi when we're talking about it. We're talking about modulating levels so that they're not overexcited or too depressed. So specifically, let's talk about the immune system for a second. Say somebody with an autoimmune disorder has an overexcited immune system. Mushrooms are so important to look into because they modulate the immune system. They're known as immunomodulatory molecules. So whether that immune system is overexcited or depressed, it actually is working to bring that back to a homeostasis. There's a lot of plants you can't work with as an autoimmune patient because they're overexcitatory or overdepressive to the immune system. So mushrooms are very unique in that manner, in that when you see that a mushroom is antifungal or antimicrobial, it actually truly means it's fungal modulating or modulatory in a certain way. So I really want to just try to get us to not think in the anti or pro. I want us to think in more of a modulatory term. Whenever we're consuming fungi, we're modulating our health. We're changing it so that we can meet homeostasis. We're not exciting it, we're not depressing it, we're trying to get back to homeostasis. What is homeostasis? Homeostasis is where we should be as a biological entity. That's our healthy state. A lot of us are pushing past that, so we need to try to kind of figure out how to hone that back in and get those immune systems back on point. So as I mentioned, 60 to 80% of North American adults have at least one chronic illness, but the most scary statistic out of that is that 40% of kids have at least one chronic illness. And what this really makes me think about is how much of the microbiome is passed from one generation to another. This is one of the most determinant factors of what your microbiome is going to look like, is vaginal inoculation as you're born. And if you don't have that, you need to do some serious work on nurturing your microbiome so that you can have that inoculum in your system. It's really, really important to have a healthy mother birthing a healthy child through vaginal process, because that is actually how we get inoculated with a lot of our microbiome. A lot of our microbiome actually stems from that birthing process, whether or not we're super stressed in that environment, whether or not, or like the location of that environment, the sterility of that environment. I personally think we're way over sterile as a society, and we need to be thinking of microbes as more modulatory rather than pathogenic. So this is a really determinant factor. But the other key determining factor of our microbiomes is how much they're nurtured through our diet and lifestyle as adults. So this is where it gets really exciting to me, because we all have a say in what our microbiomes are doing, and nobody else can nurture your microbiome or your microbiome for you. You have to do that on your own, and that gives me a sense of duty. I think we all have a duty to actually nurture our own microbiomes for each other. I truly believe that a lot of us are walking around not even knowing what it's like to feel good. So I want us to start feeling good again so that we can actually be nicer to each other. And I think it's as simple as that, honestly. If we get our people healthier, then we're all just going to be nicer to each other in general, because we're all going to start feeling better. Some crazy statistics about what's made up in our gut is that a lot of our dopamine and our serotonin, those are our feel-good receptors, are literally made up in our gut. Those are produced by microbes if we're healthy. So upwards of 90% of our serotonin, our feel-good hormone, our hormone that makes us feel safe and comforted, comes from our gut. If our gut's compromised, how much of that serotonin is not being produced? Like, we're walking around, I don't think we have like intrinsically depressed individuals. I think we have depressed microbiomes. And I think as soon as we nurture those microbiomes, all of a sudden people are going to feel like crazy good. Like to the point that they're like, oh my God, what is this? This is weird. So I've had people take lion's mane before, and lion's mane and reishi are both in our extracts. And I'm not here to promote my extracts, I'm just here to promote mushrooms in general. I want all mushroom growers and just mushrooms to thrive. And I'm really just here to advocate for the fungi. But lion's mane and reishi are specifically modulatory to the microbiome. And I've seen some pretty crazy anecdotal things after somebody just starts taking the lion's mane in terms of what their microbiome is doing. And I do truly believe that they're just producing more serotonin, so they feel high. So they come up to me and they're like, hey, is lion's mane psychoactive? And I'm like, no, you just feel good. And honestly, I just think the majority of people aren't normally feeling good. So when they feel that, they're like, holy smokes, this is too much clarity. This is really crazy. But I think that's where we all need to be, because that's like where my level of excitement comes from. I think it's just stemming a lot from the mushrooms. And I just want to see other people incorporate them in their own lives. I've seen numerous different types of cancers. I can't say the C word, but I can say that I've seen tremendous decrease in both cancers and tumors anecdotally from people that take these with late stage cancers. So I've seen multiple stage 4 cancer reversals, seen multiple late stage tumors that have just gone benign through taking different types of mushrooms, specifically chaga with that one, and turkey tail. So diet and lifestyle. We have a say in most of what nurtures our microbiome, and that's why I feel like it's so important to get across this concept to you guys, because we actually have a say in what it's doing. It's literally our duty to nurture our own microbiomes. So let's see. I talked a lot about the microbiome. I don't really want to bore you guys too much, but there is some statistics in here that I find really interesting. So 100 to 600 million neurons within the gut. I don't know if you guys have heard about the gut-brain axis before, but the gut-brain axis is now becoming a huge source of study in a lot of scientific realms, and it's because we have so many neurons in our gut, and we always thought that neurons were just stemming from our brain. So now we know there's a gut-brain connection, there's a heart-brain connection. I'm pretty sure we're going to understand soon that there's a lung-brain connection, a skin-brain connection, because we have neurotransmitters in all of these systems, and all of it ends up being nurtured or destroyed based on how the microbiome is operating. I'm sure you guys have heard this term also, or this saying before, but Hippocrates said it almost 2,500 years ago now, all disease begins in the gut. And I just really need us to understand that concept super well, because a lot of people say it, but I really need that to sink in. That's really one of the most important concepts we're ever going to take in this understanding of this topic specifically. We were talking a lot about rooting forward and community base. And I really love how much this community shows up for each other. I think it's so sweet. And it's something that I've never experienced in any other community, really. But are you nurturing your own community for yourself? So we have that community of microbes that I was talking about, and we need to take that community, like I love that we're so community-centric, but we need to take that into almost more of a selfish realm as well, and upgrade the community within us. Because we have this whole community that actually ends up getting neglected, and I think it's just because it's microbial and we forget that it's there and we can't see it. So, let's see. Where am I going now? Yeah. Sure, I'll take a question.
Okay, cool. So I know you were mentioning some of the mushrooms. I'm curious as to if we were going to eat them, if you're not sick, just wanting to help nourish our microbiome, about how much of the different mushrooms would we eat in our diet, and does it matter how we prepare them?
Yeah, awesome question.
And I think this is on video, so can we eat it in the microphone?
Yeah, yeah, awesome. Yeah, so fungal diversity matters. She asked what mushrooms specifically we should be eating and in what frequency. There's a really cool meta-analysis that came out, I want to say at the beginning of this year or last year. It showed that cultures that eat mushrooms, and this is any type of mushroom, all the way down from the common button mushroom to the nice chanterelle you'd find in the wild. Cultures that eat mushrooms 4 to 5 times per week had at least a 40% reduction in all dementia-related illnesses. So that is just scratching the surface about what our microbiome can end up helping us with. So in terms of the use of mushrooms in our diet, I think as much as possible. It's really hard to incorporate mushrooms into every meal unless you're growing them and have them all over the place like us. But it is really important to try to get them into every meal that you can. And I have to give a huge shout out actually while I'm on this topic to Tylor Berreth, who wrote a book, and I'm gonna forget the name of it right now. So Healing Mushrooms is a book that Tylor Berreth wrote. And I'm not here to promote his products either, but he has a dual extract company that's really amazing. But he has tons of different ways to prepare mushrooms in a really palatable way. So he has maitake muffins on there. He has all these different like reishi cacao blends that are sweet mushroom blends that you would never even like guess would pair well with mushrooms. So there's tons of ways to cook mushrooms, different one thing I want to talk about is medicinal mushrooms versus gourmet mushrooms. They're really all medicinal, but when we say medicinal mushrooms, they're too hard to eat. So when we're talking medicinal mushrooms, we're saying like reishi specifically. It would be so tough that you could not eat it, but you would throw it into a soup and extract it that way. So there's a lot of different ways I can go with this subject right now, and since I'm on it, I'm just going to tell you guys some of the best ways to cook your mushrooms. So when you get a mushroom from the store, and I would recommend getting any mushroom from the store, honestly, as long as the source is right, I would highly recommend staying away from Chinese-grown mushrooms because there's a lot of ethical implications on what they're growing on. Little tangent, mushrooms are bioaccumulators and bioremediators, so whatever they're growing off of, they're hyper-accumulating into their fruit bodies. So you actually have to really do your due diligence and pay attention where you're foraging mushrooms, pay attention to who's growing mushrooms, because some people supplement their blocks with conventional substrates that are full of pesticides, herbicides, rodenticides, all types of biocides that you have to be really careful of. So, be careful of your sourcing, but for the most part, just buy more mushrooms. Just try to get more mushrooms into the diet. Forage more mushrooms if you can. I really want there to be less fear around it, although it's respectfully so. Like some of them can kill you, but we do need to be eating a lot more of them. And some plants can kill you too, and we don't have that stop us from going and foraging plants. So, cook your mushrooms. So, one of the main things that people kind of talk to me about is like, can I eat this raw? And I would say yes, but I would not recommend eating any mushrooms raw, although there's a couple species I'm not even going to mention, but I would not recommend eating any of the mushrooms raw. They're made up of a cell wall called chitin, and that chitin is really good at being non-digestible in its raw form. You have to break it down with heat. So if you get fresh mushrooms from the store, the best way, I think by far, is a soup, because you're getting that medicinal extraction and then you get to eat the mushrooms too. So you have a medicinal soup extract, a water extract there, and you get to eat the rest of the mushrooms too, and they're cooked down. So I think soups are honestly the most medicinal way to do it, but the more you cook your mushrooms, no matter what, the more medicinal benefit you're gonna get, to a certain extent. So you want to saute your mushrooms down really, really well to actually get benefit from them. I have a lot of people come up and they're just like, they'll just eat like an oyster mushroom raw, and I'm just like, whoa, that's crazy. I love that you respect the fungi that much, but I don't do that. It's really cool that people like have that taste for it and they just feel like they need to eat it. I think it's biological in nature too. Like I said, we grew up around these fungi. We actually require them to grow up and survive. So when we see them in the wild, I've never met somebody that's like, oh, that's cool. Everybody that I meet is just like, oh my God, that's fascinating. And I think it's just hitting biological markers within us, like, oh, I found food for my village, or I found, like, we just know that they're medicinal just by the way that we are. They're just deeply embedded in our biology. So we need to nurture that microbiome. We need to be cooking our mushrooms really well. Soups are great, gravies are great. Just try to cook your mushrooms on high heat for at least 15 minutes. It's like a good general rule of thumb. Some of them are even carcinogenic, so I'll mention the common button mushroom should not be eaten raw, especially because it has a carcinogenic shell on the outside that can be broken down via heat really easily. But if you don't break down that shell, that agarotine, that can actually be a carcinogen. So if you're eating raw button mushrooms, that could actually hurt you more than help you. That one's pretty specific. Not a whole lot of others are like that. But when it comes down to wild foraged mushrooms, I think this is a huge reason why we're seeing so many poisonings amongst edible species, is because we're not cooking them enough. So a lot of these poisons or toxins, mycotoxins we'll call them, they're actually broken down really easily via heat. So you have to cook some of these compounds out in order to even make them edible. So say an aspen orange cap. A lot of people find that that is edible, but I'd say maybe 25% of people don't find that it sits well with them. They have like extreme gastrointestinal pains. I think one, it comes down to the microbiome, but also two, it comes down to how it's cooked and prepared. So just prepare your mushrooms really mindfully. Don't just throw them in with your veggies, because they kind of have to be, they can be just thrown in with your veggies, but try to think of them differently. Don't think of them as a vegetable and don't just throw them in with the veggies. Try to prepare them on their own and then add them to dishes. One really awesome way you can get a dual extract in your pan is actually a vinegar. So you have a vinegar that's alcohol as well as water. So you're actually getting a dual extract in your pan. So I would highly recommend sauteing up in a wine or a vinegar. That's a really good way to prepare your mushrooms. All right. So as I mentioned also, there's a lung microbiome. So we actually have all of these, I want to say roughly 8 species within our lungs that are protecting us from spore loads. So if you think about how many spores are in the atmosphere, it's literally trillions. There's just like there's just a spore load in the atmosphere that's always there. That's why things mold, because there's always mold spores always around. So if we were breathing those in constantly without our lung microbiome working, we would be getting taken over with pathogenic fungi all over the place. We'd have chronic illnesses within our lungs, and I think we're actually seeing that in some cases too play out. So we need to nurture the microbiome in our lungs too. And ultimately all this comes from being around microbes more. Specifically fermented foods. So I'm going to read some studies about Saccharomyces cerevisiae, which is found in sourdough, sauerkraut, kimchi, all like a lot of fermented products. But this Saccharomyces cerevisiae has been found to be one of the most important prebiotic fibers and probiotics. It's really, really important for the gut microbiome to have the right amount of Saccharomyces cerevisiae, and that is actually modulated through eating other fungi. So not only will fungi feed the Saccharomyces cerevisiae, but it will also keep it in check. So one thing that I just really want to hit home with this talk is that if we're not eating mushrooms, we're not able to modulate the mushrooms within our body or the fungi within our body. And that's super important to understand. If we can focus on healing our microbiomes and our mycobiomes specifically, I think we're actually going to work our way out of a lot of these chronic illnesses. We're finding that healing the microbiome actually ends up improving blood sugar levels. It improves blood pressure. It improves cognitive performance. It improves all of our immune systems, both our innate and humoral immune systems. They're we have actually a multitude of immune systems. They're all nurtured by this microbiome. When this microbiome dies, our immune systems get extremely depleted. So one study specifically shows Saccharomyces cerevisiae exerts inhibitory effects against E. coli. So something we wouldn't really think either, fungi protecting us against a bacteria. So that's a really, really important thing to understand. So there's 3 different pathways that this happens: direct antagonism, competitive exclusion, and host immunomodulation. Host immunomodulation is probably one of the most important concepts to understand because it's upgrading all of our immune systems based on how they need to interact with the pathogens themselves. They also release anti-inflammatory cytokines. So when we're eating those fermented foods and consuming those mushrooms, they're actually improving our inflammatory response. I don't want to say they're anti-inflammatory because, like I said, I don't want us to think anti or pro. I really want us to think modulatory. We need that inflammatory process to heal from things and various other things, but we need it to stay in check. We cannot have it be a chronic inflammatory process, and mushrooms will really help this be quelled and not turn into a chronic issue. A study posted in the Lancet Microbe showed that dysbiosis of the gut microbiota has been implicated in a number of diseases spanning autoimmune, metabolic, and neurological disorders and cancers. So when I talk about the microbiome being disrupted, it's much more than us just being unhappy. It's much more than us just being sick. It has really, really large implications to our neurological behaviors, I think a lot of us, probably the majority of us, have seen people suffer from dementia-related illnesses. If there's something that can help prevent dementia-related illnesses, then I think we need to be implementing that into our diet as much as possible. And mushrooms are actually shown to be just that. Importantly, gut fungi are still largely overlooked in the context of microbiota-based development of therapeutics, and available microbiome findings are not fully honored in clinical practice. This is why I was saying earlier, question your doctors if they're telling you just to stay away from fungi altogether. If you have mycosis or fungal infection, systemic fungal infection in the body, a lot of times they're going to say stay away from mushrooms altogether. Just really question that narrative. Really try to look into the science, because the science isn't showing that if you stay away from mushrooms, that will help. The science is actually showing that if you incorporate more mushrooms, it will end up helping you. So it's really important to keep in mind. So it improves our trained immunity, which is our ability to actually upgrade our immune systems as well. So not only is it upgrading our immune pathways specifically, but it's actually helping our immune pathways to learn the pathogens better, so we can actually be further protected in the future. All of these microbes are containing information. So that information is carried from each microbe in order to either protect us or take us over. So each microbe has its own agenda. Each microbe wants to just survive and take over, basically. But they all know how to play well together if they're in the same environment. If something is not in that environment that it needs to play with, that thing is going to override your system. So let's see. A study posted in the journal Biological Chemistry showed that fungal chitin induces trained immunity in human monocytes during crosstalk of the host with Saccharomyces. So here in this study, we see not only are fungi interacting with Saccharomyces, like the things that we're getting through fermented foods such as sourdoughs and sauerkrauts and stuff like that, but it's actually the chitin itself from the mushrooms that it's a prebiotic feeding the bacteria. So it's a loop. This is a continuous feedback loop that's just constantly helping each other if they're present in the gut. If they're not, then they're just going to continually go extinct or overrun one another. So that fungal chitin, remember, chitin is the cell structure that actually makes up the mushroom. So that's a really, really important prebiotic to host the microbes in our gut as probiotics. There's some really profound insect models showing that improving the microbiomes of the insects, and specifically the mycobiomes of the insects, upgrades their immune pathways pretty significantly. So Paul Stamets was pretty famous for watching his bees feed off the mycelium in his planter beds, and he realized that they were drinking the mycelium exudates is what it's called, but it's basically like a water that the mycelium will put off. They were drinking that, and they were upgrading their detox pathway to the point that they were actually popping varroa off their backs. And the varroa mite, for those of you that don't know, is one of the main causes of deformed wing virus and genetic mutations within the colony. So it's really, really important to protect the host defense of those organisms all the way down to insects. So even insects have their own microbiomes. Even our own microbiota have their own microbiomes. So this is an area of research that needs profound investigation still, but there's so much cool science coming out about it, about the interactions, about the microscopic nature of the universe. And that's why I was saying we need to look smaller to look bigger, because the fact that these microbes have their own microbiomes it's really like kind of hard to comprehend. Like there's a whole nother universe within the universe inside of us. It's really crazy. So yeah, you have to think about something that a health expert that I listen to constantly talks about is how everything that you eat has its own microbiome. So an apple has its own microbiome. It's made up of a host of different microbes, but it also has its own mycobiome that's going to nurture your microbiome in a specific way. Hence why diversity of food is so important. Let me just stay on track here. Okay, so there's another really cool study about, I love sourdough because we started a bakery, and we kind of joked around when we first started that bakery, and we were like, let's grow mushrooms in the backspace. And it just turned into this like full-scale thing that's like, I'm just really astounded at where it's come. But so I'm really stoked on Saccharomyces cerevisiae because my wife is so excited about sourdough bread. So when I was reading all these studies, I was just kind of freaking out. So it enhances the immune response in paper wasps across the entire colony, but specifically for the queen. So all of these nutrients end up like being shuttled to the queen to keep the queen healthy, because basically the worker drones don't need to be as healthy, but the queen needs to be super healthy. So the queen's microbiome is extremely resilient and diverse. Whereas the drone bees, they don't really have much of a microbiome, but it's really, really crucial. All of the healthy colonies, they tested the queen bees, and they all have healthy microbiomes. And they do truly think that the healthy microbiome is what's protecting the entirety of the colony from collapsing. So it's really, really important for our pollinators to be exposed to more mushrooms, hence why it's so important to have mushrooms incorporated into your garden spaces. So something we've been trying to help people with is inoculate their garden spaces so that they can have mushrooms fruit up in their own spaces. Not only is that going to help the soil, it's going to help sequester carbon, it's going to help so many things. Water retention is a huge issue in this valley. When we have more mycelium in the soil, we're going to retain way more water. There's going to be way more of an equilibrium with drainage, and it's just going to be keeping that topsoil way more alive. So let's see. Yeah, go ahead.
Does it matter what kind of mushrooms grow in your garden? I mean, or should you just be happy with mushrooms?
Yeah, that's a great question. So she asked if it matters what type of mushrooms are growing, and I'll see all the time online, people are like, oh, this fairy ring is taking over my garden, how do I kill it? But I would venture to say that you should nurture that rather than try to kill it. So I don't think it matters really what mushrooms are growing. If there are mushrooms present in your space, your soil is building. You're building soil, and you're creating a more solid microbiome within the soil. So not only is the microbiome super important for the gut in the humans, the microbiome of the soil is entirely crucial for the health of the soil and the plants as well. So no, it doesn't matter. As long as you have mushrooms popping up, you should be really excited. But the mushrooms that we're inoculating for people are actually edible mushrooms. So it's mostly Colorado oysters that people can actually end up using as food and medicine, which is really exciting. But that's also there's a host of benefits to the insects as well. So it's just helping a lot of the ecosystem in ways that we can't even really comprehend yet. But yeah, more mushrooms are good, no matter what, basically. But although some can kill you, so it's just something to keep in mind. So don't eat all mushrooms, but get excited about all mushrooms. So there's a really important study that came out in the Journal of Science about Crohn's patients, and it says, so it was all about Candida overgrowth, and when Candida starts to outnumber Saccharomyces cerevisiae, like I was talking about earlier, there's a close connection to the microbiome dysbiosis and Crohn's disease. And I know a lot of people are suffering from Crohn's, but this is just one illness that people really don't see a great cure for yet, that can actually be quelled by consuming more fungi. And just nurturing your microbiome will ultimately really help any type of gut dysbiosis like that. I was talking about the gut-brain connection. So there's the gut-brain axis, and fungi is extremely important for that. So there's a study posted in the Journal of Microbiome, and it says, new evidence on the altered gut microbiota in autism spectrum disorders. And this is a really fascinating study. So they found the same microbiome disorders within autism spectrum patients as they did in Alzheimer's patients. They found the same microbiome dysbiosis in Crohn's patients. Almost across the board for all of these things they're studying, they're finding the same microbiota dysbiosis. So not consuming more mushrooms is actually really detrimental to our health. Not consuming fermented foods is really detrimental to our health because we're not feeding our endogenous fungi. So our endogenous fungi are the fungi coming from within and the things that we need to nurture, such as the yeasts that are modulating our immune systems, the fungi that are in there, all the fungi that are in there. Exogenous fungi are the fungi that are coming from outside, and those are the fungi that can be pathogenic or opportunistic, but they're also modulatory. So we need all of this in a balance. We can't find this balance in any other way than nurturing the microbiome. It all just comes down to nurturing the microbiome, and we really need to be thinking about the mycobiome as a super integral role of the microbiome. But it's just not being pushed into our popular lexicon yet. That's why I'm here. So we have a study published in eBiomedicine that shows a very similar dysbiosis in all dementia-related patients. Fungi and bacteria need to be in equilibrium to maintain proper health. They need to be in equilibrium. The fungi already know how to be in equilibrium. It's just whether or not we're providing the right environment. So if we're not eating fungi at all, we're actually not providing our body with an opportunity to even be at that homeostasis level. So an article on Rupa Health published in 2023 says that gut health and medicinal mushrooms, exploring the gut immune connection, saying that polysaccharides stimulate the growth of beneficial gut microbiota, promoting gut, immune, and overall health. So they do enhance gut flora and immune system strength resilience directly. It's really, really important to remember. Like I said earlier, mushrooms are generally just immunomodulatory, so we really need to be incorporating these, especially for autoimmune disorders, things like that. If we can get, yeah, go ahead. Oh, yeah, for sure. Cool, thank you. Yeah, do we have any questions so far about anything? Yeah.
So, I know that like you're supposed to cook mushrooms really well, but then on the other hand, like when you cook a lot of food, you're like killing a lot of things in it. And I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, it's counterintuitive, right? So that's why I keep saying that fungi are their own kingdom, because they have to be looked at differently. So when we reduce plants down, basically by cooking them, a lot of times we're actually destroying nutrients, like pretty easily actually. Mushrooms are so much different. We're actually releasing more of the medical constituents if we're cooking them down more. Furthermore, it's really interesting because when you dry mushrooms, a lot of their medicinal components actually become concentrated. So in a lot of ways, dried mushrooms are more effective in medicinal uses than actually the fresh ones. But in terms of eating, you obviously need the fresh ones. So when people ask like the best way to incorporate medicinal mushrooms into their diet is, I say a dual extract, because you can find that in either a liquid form or a powder form. And that means that you get a water extract mixed with an alcohol extract. And it's just really simple to get your mushroom medicine that way. You can keep it on the countertop or whatever, throw it in coffee or throw it into soups or whatever you want. That way you don't actually have to eat the mushrooms, because the majority of people that I get told don't like mushrooms, it's a texture thing. So if you can get rid of that texture thing and get the medicinal mushroom benefits also, then there's a win-win. So if you find a dual extract product, it's really important to have that dual extract, because the polysaccharides are going to be in the water portion. The polysaccharides are what feed your healthy gut microbiota, and that's what ultimately will propel like health forward.
So I just want to say, we are live feed, so if someone has a question, if you don't mind, I'll hand you the mic so that everyone else can hear your question. You guys can all hear each other, but we just want to make sure the audience gets to hear it as well, okay? That's all right.
Perfect, thank you. Yeah, if anybody has a question, just raise their hand and I'll just pass the mic off, or yeah, we can figure it out. Cool. Any other questions so far? Yeah.
Hello. I'm a mushroom enthusiast, and I've, I read, I picked and dried some mushrooms maybe a year or two ago, and I took them, and I had some disorder. Now, so your discussion about cooking is a big, important part of it, and maybe I didn't cook it enough. But the question I have is, I know that some of the soils in our area here are high in arsenic. And your explanation of uptake and concentration within mushrooms, I think, is part of the, in some cases, why people maybe are shying away from the, picking, even though that species may be something you think you're familiar with. I don't know. I mean, if something doesn't agree with you, then normally, logic says don't eat it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, so that's where it's like really disheartening to hear when people have bad mushroom stories, because they just group all mushrooms kind of with that same story. It's a really good point about the arsenic. I do think that what I'm seeing when people are saying they're getting sick from edible species is that they're actually finding it next to mine tailings specifically. And I think what I'm boiling it down to is that they're heavy metal toxicities that we're finding, because there will be completely edible mushrooms that people will pick and be like, I got really sick and the whole group got sick. And I'm like, okay, let's boil this down to where you found it, because this is definitely an edible mushroom. I've never seen anybody get sick from it. Always at a mine tailing. So I think it always comes down to that hyperaccumulation and that toxicity effect that's happening because of that. So it's really important to keep in mind. I think our water down here specifically is really high in arsenic. So that's something to keep in mind. If you're watering with that water, then they could be uptaking a large amount of arsenic. Definitely something to keep in mind. And that's why it's super important to trust your growers. So it's really important to get people growing that know this stuff, that know that you need a clean substrate, that know that you can't have heavy metal contaminants in there, know that you can't be using tap water because there's a lot of heavy metals in the tap water, pharmaceutical constituents and things like that. So it's really important to know your sourcing, really important to know your growers, really important to know that your growers care about organic practices. And that's why we got certified organic, just to like really show people there's nothing that we're hiding in our product or anything like that. But yeah, it's something to really think about for sure. Where are those mushrooms popping up? If it's an edible species, should you even eat that? Could it be potentially bioremediating something? That's a really good question, because most of the time they are bioremediating something. They're popping up next to riverways all the time. They're bioremediating the toxins that are getting lost in the river. They're so strong, they're starting to break down plastics. So like now we've isolated a plastic-eating mycelium from, I believe, what was a landfill in Kazakhstan. So they found this plastic-eating mycelium growing on this bottle. They bring it back to the laboratory. They accelerate its plastic-eating ability. It goes from eating a plastic bottle in 20 years to eating a plastic bottle in a couple months. So they can absorb the harshest chemicals we've ever created as humans, which is really hard to fathom. There's some of the first things to pop up after Fukushima were morel mushrooms. Morel mushrooms are extreme hyperaccumulators of radioactive cesium. They can concentrate it up to like 500 times in their fruiting bodies. So if you ate one morel mushroom next to Fukushima plant, you would die, for sure. So just something to keep in mind. Like, if the microbiome of the soil wasn't nurtured, the mycelium coming out of that soil is probably not going to be safe. But it's also crucial. That mycelium is there for a reason. There's So in humanure practices, it's really common practice to compost your humanure. When you do that, what I've seen from people is that when they throw their humanure out, almost instantaneously, the next like week or two, they'll have shaggy manes or inky caps or coprophilic species of mushrooms that pop up in their microclimates, in their compost bins. But after doing further research, you can realize that those spores are dormant within our guts, and they're actually colonizing our poop as we poop. So like they're staying dormant in our gut until they're actually released in our excrement, and then they start colonizing our excrement as soon as they're released. So it's really fascinating. They already know how to bioremediate feces. They know how to bioremediate all the pathogens within all of these feces. They know how to bioremediate the gnarliest toxins we've ever created, the longest carbon chains we've ever created in plastics. They can start breaking down. I really meant to say this earlier, but our slogan is where there is mycelium, there is hope. And I want to keep bringing it back to that because I just feel that so deeply. When there's mycelium in your microbiome, there's hope for health. When there's mycelium in the soil, there's hope for carbon sequestration and building more soil. And like that's one of the best things, most divine things we can do on this planet, I think, is probably amplify natural processes and literally build soil. Thank you. 5 minutes left? Oh, dang, okay. I knew I had a lot to fit in, but I never am able to fit it all in. My main, honestly, I just want to hit home, like eat more mushrooms. Eat more mushrooms, eat more mushrooms. Don't be scared of them, but also respect them. They can kill you, but they can also nurture you in really profound ways that we don't even understand fully yet. It is so important to be nurturing the microbiomes in the gut, and I literally find it a duty for all of us to do so because nobody is going to help you nurture your own microbiome. You literally have to do that yourself. If you want to get yourself out of chronic illness, if we want to get our nation out of chronic illness, change those statistics that I was talking about earlier, we just change our microbiomes, and I have so much hope that we're going to see a brighter future after that. It really just comes down to nurturing mycelium more and understanding it better. But I'd like to open it up for some questions. If anybody has any questions, yeah.
I came in a little late. Could you refresh? Who are you?
Yeah. My name's Tylor Berreth.
What your background is?
Yeah. My name's Tylor Berreth. I went to a couple different universities, but ultimately MSU Denver is kind of the one I associate with the most. I got my integrative healthcare degree there. Through a bunch of serendipity, I got into growing mushrooms. I took a botanical pharmacology class there that really got me interested in the medicinal benefits of shiitake specifically. And that is one of the most anti-candida molecules on the planet. If you guys do have some candida issues, I really highly recommend looking into shiitake extracts. Shiitake is a candida destroyer. So yeah, I studied at MSU Denver. I got really interested in mycology through that degree. It wasn't a mycology degree by any standard, but all of my professors were just like pushing me in that direction. They're like, you need to study this, do all your projects on that. And I went with it. So I just read a lot of books, read a lot of articles, and yeah, I'm honestly just really passionate about fungi, and I feel like I need to be an advocate for fungi because there's a lot of people talking about it because it's really exciting right now, and there's a lot of science coming out, but I don't think there's enough. And I think we need more focus on mushrooms, more focus on mycelium, and more focus on specifically like what their health implications for us and the ecosystem at large.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, thank you. Yeah, sorry. Any other questions?
I'm not sure if you talked about this yet, but I just wondered what your thoughts were on the benefits of eating mushrooms versus like an extract, like tinctures versus powder or anything like that.
Yeah, I personally recommend extracts when people are trying to get their mushroom medicine in because it's a way easier form. It's a little bit more bioavailable. It's already ready for your body to be converting that. Nice, that was my alarm for questions. So I always recommend dual extracts for people just because the accessibility. But if you have the ability, eat mushrooms all the time. Like the more the merrier, honestly. It's really hard to find articles about toxicities and over-consuming. It's also hard to find contraindications with mushrooms, which is really rare. So yeah, I personally think the more the merrier. There's obviously going to be some things that you need to be aware of, like lion's mane reduces blood pressure quite a bit, so maybe don't take that with the blood pressure medication. But there's honestly not a lot of science about any contraindications or anything like that, so eat more mushrooms, take dual extracts. Yeah. Yes, yeah, cook your mushrooms really well. And if they're dried, rehydrate them as well as you can. It's really hard to rehydrate, to your point earlier, and cook them at the same time. So if they're already dried, rehydrating them really isn't enough. You need to cook them on high heat in a soup for a long time after they're rehydrated. Yeah. Yeah. Real quick, broad overview, cordyceps for energy, reishi for cardiovascular support, and honestly everything. It's the mushroom of immortality. Lion's mane for brain and nervous system support. Oysters are incredibly overlooked for medicinal value, incredibly overlooked. They're extremely modulatory to the microbiome. They're extremely good for the skin. Studies showing that it's way better than hyaluronic acid actually at retaining moisture in the skin, which is crazy. There's studies on skin cancers with oyster mushroom extract specifically. Oysters are super overlooked for medicinal value. So get excited about your oysters. Also, the placebo effect, please work with that. We call the placebo effect and kind of like shut it down. We can use that placebo effect to our advantage, make that medicine 33% more effective. If you are eating something and you're like, I'm not gonna get much benefit from that, you're gonna get less benefit. If you're like, this is a medicinal power-packed superfood, you're gonna get a ton of medicinal benefit from that. Play with the psychology behind it.
Okay, do we have any last minute questions for Tyler? Okay.
Talk to plant efficacy. Obviously, we want to eat the whole plant, the whole food. We want to get the wide, broadest range of constituents. At the same time, standardized extracts, 2%, 5%, 8%, and then you have polysaccharides, up to greater than 20%, polysaccharides greater than 50%, and then you've got beta-glucans, which is what is beta-glucan a subset of polysaccharides?
Another carbohydrate, yeah.
So in essence, my understanding is beta-glucans are the most efficacious of the subsets of polysaccharides, and henceforth the most desirable. So I don't know, maybe you could just talk about efficacy in terms of whole plant versus standardized measured extracts?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so the whole plant is going to be extremely beneficial, but that's why I say dual extract, because you're going to be pulling out the polysaccharides, the beta-glucans and stuff like that with the water extract. You're missing out on all the sesquiterpene benefits, all of your steroidal compounds. Those are pulled out in the alcohol. That's why it's really, really important to get a dual extract with your mushrooms. Super, super important. You want a water extract mixed with an alcohol extract. And there's ways that you can reduce it down even further, but yeah, that's the basis. You need the water extract and the alcohol extract combined. Yeah, it's becoming more of a practice in mushroom medicines now to have dual extracts, but there are mushroom supplements on the shelf that aren't dual extracted. There's also various different supplements that have like grain fillers or things like that. I could talk all day about that alone, but just really pay attention to the sourcing, really pay attention to the extracts, like how they're extracting it, and just pay attention to the company as a whole.
Tyler, do you have a booth or somewhere where people could talk to you about your products? I
Yeah.
think that'd be a great way to follow up on this talk.
Yeah, so if you guys do have extra questions, I'll just be right over there with my wife at Alpine Valley Mushrooms, that white tent there. So feel free to come up and pick my brain about mushrooms. I talk about mushrooms all the time, so yeah. Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it.
Yay. Thank you, Tyler from Alpine Valley Mushrooms.